My husband demanded a divorce after 20 years of marriage. "I will take everything. You will be left with nothing." My lawyer shouted, "Fight!" But I signed everything. He celebrated for a week. I was laughing. He forgot that. Good day, dear listeners. It's Briella again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please like this video and listen to my story till the end and let me know which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. People always asked me what 20 years of marriage looked like. I used to smile and say, "It looks like a Tuesday morning. Coffee on the counter before you even ask for it. A hand on your shoulder when the news is bad. The particular silence of someone who knows you well enough not to fill every room with noise." That was what I believed marriage was. That was what I thought I had. My name is Claire Alderman. I was 44 years old when my husband, Daniel, told me he wanted a divorce. We lived in a pale yellow house on Sycamore Drive in suburban Columbus, Ohio, the kind of street where people wave from their driveways and bring casseroles when someone has surgery. We had 2 kids in college, a golden retriever named Hatch, and a joint savings account that I had helped build from nearly nothing. I had worked as a paralegal for 17 years at the same firm. Daniel owned a mid-sized construction company he'd started 12 years ago, with my signature on the initial loan, a fact he had long since stopped mentioning. For a long time, I thought we were fine. Looking back, the first signals weren't dramatic. They never are. It started with a phone, face down on the kitchen table. A small thing. Daniel had always been the kind of man who left his phone everywhere. On the bathroom counter, on top of the refrigerator, charging in the car. Suddenly it went everywhere with him, to the bathroom, to the garage. I noticed. The way you notice a painting is crooked before you can explain why the room feels wrong. Then came the late evenings. He'd always had long days. Construction doesn't stop for weather or mood. But these were different. He would come home after 9, smell of restaurant food and something else I couldn't name, and go straight for the shower. When I asked how his day was, he answered in single words, "Fine, busy, tired." He'd stopped asking about mine. There were smaller things, too. He began criticizing my clothes. Not meanly, but with a kind of tired disdain, as if I'd let myself go. He bought new shirts and a watch I'd never seen before. He started going to the gym at 6 in the morning, something he hadn't done in a decade. I told myself he was having a midlife adjustment. I told myself a lot of things. The Sunday it broke open was ordinary. I had made pot roast, the kind he claimed to love. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, cut his meat into precise squares, and said nothing for 20 minutes. I asked whether he wanted to go see his mother the following weekend. She'd been unwell, and I thought the trip might do him good. He put down his fork. "Claire," he said, "I want a divorce." The room didn't tilt. It didn't go dark. That's what surprised me most. How ordinary the air still felt. Hatch was asleep under the table. The clock on the microwave read 7:14. "Excuse me?" I said. "I've been unhappy for a long time." His voice was flat, prepared. He had practiced this. "I've thought about it carefully. I think we should separate." I set down my own fork. My hands were steady. That surprised me too. "How long?" I asked. He didn't answer the question. Instead, he pushed back his chair and said, "I've already spoken to a lawyer." That sentence landed differently. Already. Which meant this wasn't a sudden confession. This was a strategy. He had made appointments, had consultations, had chosen his timing. While I made pot roast and asked about his mother, the weeks that followed were a fog of controlled anger. He moved to the guest bedroom without discussion. He became businesslike and brisk, as if our marriage were now simply a transaction to be settled. He handed me papers before I'd even called a lawyer myself. A proposed agreement that gave me the house but almost none of the marital assets, no share in his company, and a modest alimony that would end in 3 years. My lawyer, Patricia Owen, a small, sharp woman who wore reading glasses on a chain and had a voice like a gavel, looked at the proposal and pushed it across the desk back at me. "Do not sign this," she said. "He says if I fight it, he'll make it worse." "Claire," she leaned forward. "Fight it. He built that company with marital funds. You have a claim. You have leverage. Don't hand him everything because he scared you first." I stared at the papers. 20 years of grocery runs and school pickups and holding down the household while his company grew. 20 years of my salary supplementing hours when his business had lean winters. 20 years. I picked up the pen and I signed. Daniel celebrated that weekend. He went out with friends I had never met, and came home at 2 a.m, louder than he'd been in years. I heard him laugh from the upstairs bedroom. A real laugh. The kind he used to save for me. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling, and I did something that confused me at the time. I smiled, because in that moment I remembered something Daniel had forgotten. Something I had only just remembered myself. I lay there until 3 a.m. I didn't cry. I'd cried the first week, privately, in the car on my lunch breaks. The kind of crying that doesn't make a sound because you've trained yourself not to be heard. By the time I signed those papers, the crying was done. What was left was something quieter and more dangerous. Clarity. I began making a mental list. That was always how I processed things. I was a paralegal, after all. I cataloged. The house on Sycamore Drive was worth approximately $410,000. I had been given it in the agreement. That sounded generous until you factored in the remaining mortgage, $187,000, and the fact that I had signed away any claim to Daniel's company, Alderman Construction, LLC, which had grown from a $50,000 startup loan into a business that, by any conservative estimate, was now worth somewhere between $1.2 and $1.8 million. That loan had come from our joint account. His first 3 years of operating costs had been partially covered by my salary. I had done the bookkeeping myself, unpaid, for the first 4 years. I knew those numbers. I had entered them into spreadsheets on Sunday evenings while Daniel watched football. I also knew something else. 17 years as a paralegal teaches you things law school doesn't always bother with. Not the theory, but the texture of how people hide assets. How a business owner facing divorce might suddenly show reduced profits on paper. How depreciation gets accelerated. How a company might, just before a settlement, take on suspiciously large consulting fees paid to entities that don't quite hold up under scrutiny. I had signed the agreement, but I had not yet filed it. There is a window, a small, quiet window, between signing a document and submitting it to the court. Patricia had not mentioned this to me explicitly, but I knew it. The way you know the architecture of a house you've lived in long enough. The agreement had to be filed jointly, and Daniel, confident in his victory, had said he would handle the paperwork himself within the week. He hadn't yet. I sat up in bed at 3:17 in the morning and asked myself one honest question. Was I afraid? Yes. Genuinely. He had money, a lawyer on retainer, and 20 years of social capital in this town. His friends coached Little League and sat on the Chamber of Commerce. Mine were mostly work colleagues and two women from my book club, who I wasn't sure would pick a side. He had told me, flat and quiet, that if I caused problems, he would make things very difficult. I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I had seen enough divorce cases at work to understand it wasn't an empty threat. But fear, I had learned, was not the same thing as helplessness. The plan formed slowly, the way plans do when they're real, not all at once, not in a flash of inspiration, but piece by piece, like setting a table in the dark. First, I needed information before anything else. Daniel had been running his company for 12 years. I had been tangentially involved. The bookkeeping in the early years, the loan co-signature, occasional administrative help when his office manager went on leave, which meant I had access to documents most soon-to-be ex-wives wouldn't. Old tax returns, early financial records, the original loan agreement. I hadn't touched that box in years. It was in the attic, in a gray plastic tub labeled business/tax. Do not toss, in my own handwriting. Second, I needed a forensic accountant, not just my lawyer, a financial specialist who could look at the company's current filings and tell me whether what I suspected about asset concealment was real or paranoid. Patricia had mentioned one in passing once, a woman named Sandra Chu, who worked with several Columbus area family law firms. I had written the name in the margin of my notepad and never called her. Third, I needed time, and that meant keeping Daniel comfortable. He believed I had signed and surrendered. For now, that belief was the most valuable thing I possessed. Let him celebrate, I thought. Let him think it's over. On Monday morning, I went to work as usual. I stopped at the attic on my way out and took the gray plastic tub down from the shelf without turning on the overhead light. I put it in the trunk of my car under a gym bag. I called Sandra Chu during my lunch break, sitting in my car in the firm's parking garage. She picked up on the second ring. "Ms. Chu," I said, "my name is Claire Alderman. I signed a divorce agreement 3 days ago that I believe severely undervalues my contributions to a marital business asset. I have original financial records going back 12 years. I haven't filed yet. How fast can you see me?" There was a brief pause. "Tomorrow morning," she said, 8 o'clock, bring everything." I started the car. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror for a moment. Really looked the way you rarely do. You should have done this sooner, I thought. But sooner wasn't now. Now was what I had. Sandra Chu's office was on the 14th floor of a glass building downtown. Modest but precise. The kind of office where every object was where it was for a reason. She was a compact woman in her 50s with short, gray-streaked hair and the particular stillness of someone who spent her days reading between lines. She shook my hand, poured me water without asking, and sat down. I spread the contents of the gray tub across her conference table. 12 years of tax returns, the original SBA loan agreement with both our signatures, quarterly profit and loss summaries I had prepared myself in the early years, bank statements from the joint account showing the transfers that had kept the company afloat in its first lean winter. I laid them out in order. Sandra didn't react. She simply looked, methodically, her reading glasses low on her nose, and made small pencil notations on a yellow legal pad. After 40 minutes, she sat back. "Tell me what you think you're seeing," she said. I had thought about how to say it. I think the company was profitable for several years in ways the recent filings don't reflect. I think the 2 years immediately before Daniel filed for divorce show an unusual drop in declared net income. Unusual because I know what his contracts looked like. I was still doing occasional admin work as recently as 3 years ago. The numbers don't match what I observed. She nodded slowly. Do you have any contract records from those years? I pulled out a folder. I had found it at the bottom of the tub. A sleeve of photocopied contracts Daniel had asked me to file in 2021 when his office manager was out for a month. 3 municipal contracts, all mid-six figures, all signed. Sandra looked at them for a long time. Claire, she said carefully, I want to be clear. I'd need full access to current corporate filings to confirm anything. But what I can tell you, preliminarily, is that there is a significant discrepancy between the income these contracts represent and the net income declared in the most recent 2 returns. She paused. That's not proof of anything yet. But it is a question. A question was enough. A question was exactly what I needed to take back to Patricia. I called Patricia Owen from the parking garage again. I was beginning to think of it as my office, and told her what Sandra had found. Patricia was quiet for 3 seconds, which for her was the equivalent of a long pause. You still haven't filed, she said. No. Good. Don't. Come in Thursday. Bring Chu's preliminary notes. That Thursday meeting was the first official step. Patricia began the process of formally contesting the agreement before submission, citing financial non-disclosure as grounds for reassessment. It was quiet, procedural, invisible to Daniel. But it started a clock. He found out something was wrong 10 days later. I don't know exactly what tipped him off. A call from the court clerk's office he hadn't expected. Or perhaps his lawyer noticed a delay in the filing that should have happened by then. Whatever it was, he came home on a Thursday evening with a different energy. Not the flat-practiced calm of the man who had asked for the divorce. This was something tighter. Have you talked to Patricia recently? He asked, standing in the kitchen doorway, still in his jacket. A couple of times, I said. I was unloading the dishwasher. About anything specific? About the process, I said. Perfectly true. I kept my voice neutral, something 17 years of depositions and court prep had taught me to do. He watched me for a moment. I put a glass in the cabinet. He left the room, but I noticed that night, when I passed the door of his bedroom, he was on the phone. Low voice. Door almost closed. The following Monday, Sandra called me. I got access to the corporate filings through your attorney's subpoena request, she said. Claire, I need you to sit down. I was already sitting. In 2022 and 2023, Alderman Construction made payments totaling just under $340,000 to a consulting firm called Vantage Advisory Solutions. The payments are categorized as operating expenses, which would reduce declared net income substantially. She paused. I looked up Vantage Advisory Solutions. It was incorporated in Delaware in March 2021. The registered agent is a man named Kevin Brandt. I knew that name. Kevin Brandt was Daniel's college roommate. He had been at our wedding. He had held our youngest when she was 3 days old. Does Kevin Brandt provide construction consulting? I asked. He's a high school PE teacher, Sandra said. The line was quiet for a moment. That's the proof, I said. That's the beginning of the proof, Sandra said carefully. But yes, that is what I'd call a significant finding. I hung up and sat very still in my parked car. Outside, Columbus went about its Tuesday. People walked dogs and carried coffee cups and had no idea that somewhere in the city, a man who had once promised to love me was paying his college roommate $340,000 to pretend to be a consultant so that he could hand me as little as possible and walk away clean. I thought about the pot roast, the practiced voice, the already before spoken to a lawyer. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was something else entirely. The plan was not complicated. That was the thing I kept reminding myself. Complicated plans failed. Mine had 3 parts. First, Sandra Chu would complete her forensic analysis and submit a formal report documenting the Vantage advisory discrepancy, along with any additional irregularities she found in the corporate filings. That report would become the evidentiary spine of Patricia's motion to void the existing agreement and compel full financial disclosure. Second, Patricia would file a motion for a formal business valuation of Alderman Construction by an independent court-appointed evaluator. This was standard in divorces involving closely held businesses. It was the mechanism by which a judge could order Daniel to open his books completely, not just show me what he chose to show me. Third, I would say nothing. To Daniel, to his friends, to the neighbors who waved from driveways. Nothing. Patricia filed the motions on a Wednesday morning. By Friday afternoon, Daniel's lawyer had called hers. Daniel came home that evening and didn't go past the entryway. He stood in his coat and looked at me across the hallway. "What are you doing, Claire?" "I'm contesting the agreement," I said. I was sitting on the couch with a book in my lap. My voice was even. "We had a deal. We had a document I signed under duress without full financial disclosure. That's not the same thing." His jaw tightened. "You have no idea what you're starting." "I have a reasonable idea, yes." He took a step forward. "That company is mine. I built it. You built it with a loan from our joint account, 3 years of my bookkeeping, and, apparently, $340,000 in fictional consulting fees paid to Kevin Brandt." I paused. "How is Kevin, by the way?" The color left his face, not dramatically, gradually, like a tide going out. He left without another word. The following Tuesday, 2 things happened. Daniel's lawyer sent Patricia a letter threatening a countersuit for defamation over financial records, which Patricia described to me as a sign that we've hit something real. And Kevin Brandt called my cell phone. I almost didn't answer. Then I decided I wanted to hear it. "Claire." He sounded uncomfortable, which gave me a small satisfaction. "I think there's been some misunderstanding about my arrangement with Daniel's company. I do provide services, strategic advice, networking." "Kevin," I said, "you teach gym class at Westland High School. I'm going to hang up now." I hung up. That evening, Daniel escalated. He came to the house. He had technically moved to an apartment 2 weeks prior and knocked on the door with a man I didn't recognize. Mid-40s, expensive coat, the particular blankness of someone whose job involves intimidation. He introduced himself as a business associate and said with measured calm that Daniel was prepared to make things very public and very unpleasant if I continued, that he had documentation. He used the word documentation, suggesting I had interfered in company operations and could be considered liable. I looked at the man in the expensive coat. I looked at Daniel. "Tell your lawyer to call mine," I said, and I closed the door. I stood in the hallway afterward, heart going faster than I wanted it to. That had been real. The man in the coat was not theater. That was a message. Daniel had resources I didn't. He had more friends in this city, a longer business history, connections I'd never fully mapped. The threat of a counterclaim, even a baseless one, meant legal costs, time, stress. He was counting on me to calculate that math and step back. I sat down on the stairs and breathed. Then I called Patricia and told her everything. She listened, took notes, and said, "Good. They only threaten when they're scared. File the business valuation motion formally tomorrow. Let's move." We moved. The motions were filed. The court accepted them. A date was set for a preliminary hearing. 6 weeks out. Daniel's lawyer filed 2 procedural objections in the first week, both of which were denied. By the end of that week, I was genuinely exhausted. Not defeated. There is a difference, and I had learned to feel it. But emptied out in the way that follows sustained fear and sustained effort at the same time. I took Friday off work and drove 3 hours north to my college roommate Dana's house on a small lake outside Sandusky. I told her most of it: the divorce, the papers, the forensic report, the man in the expensive coat. Dana was the kind of woman who listened without interrupting and then asked the one question that actually mattered. "Are you going to finish it?" she said. "Yes," I said. She handed me a glass of wine, and we sat on her dock and watched the water until it got dark. I didn't think about Daniel once. I drove back to Columbus on Sunday evening. The lake was already behind me, receding in the rearview mirror the way rest always does. Too fast. But something had settled during those 2 days. Not resolution exactly, more like ballast. The kind of steadiness you find not by solving a problem, but simply by stepping away from it long enough to remember you existed before it. The message from Daniel's lawyer was waiting in my email when I got home. It was formal in language, but its meaning was clear. Daniel was willing to revise the agreement. He was offering an increased alimony figure, up from 3 years to 5, and a lump sum payment of $75,000 in recognition of contributions to the early growth of Alderman Construction. In exchange, I would withdraw the forensic accounting report, drop the motion for business valuation, and sign a finalized agreement within 10 days. I read it twice. $75,000. Framed as generosity, structured as silence. I thought about what Sandra Chu had told me, that her preliminary estimate placed my equitable share of the company, based on my documented contributions and the business's current fair market value, at somewhere between $280,000 and $420,000 before any court-ordered adjustments. I thought about the $340,000 paid to Kevin Brandt, which a court-appointed evaluator would almost certainly classify as improper expense structuring. I thought about the 5-year alimony, which was still a fraction of what I was entitled to under Ohio's equitable distribution statute. I thought about Daniel, sitting somewhere, his apartment, a restaurant, somewhere new, waiting to see if I would take the number. I forwarded the email to Patricia with a single line. "My answer is no." Patricia replied in 4 minutes. "Good. I'll notify opposing counsel." What I noticed most in the days that followed was how quiet I had become internally. Not numb. I still felt things. The low-grade hum of anxiety when I thought about the preliminary hearing. A flicker of grief when I drove past a restaurant Daniel and I had liked. The ordinary loneliness of cooking for one after years of cooking for a family. I felt all of that. But underneath it was something that hadn't been there before. A floor. Something that held. Daniel did not contact me directly after the offer was declined. His lawyer sent a terse acknowledgement. I imagined, perhaps wrongly, but perhaps not, that Daniel had expected me to take it. That the revised offer had felt, to him, like a final kindness, and my refusal was a kind of ingratitude. That was the shape of his thinking, and I had known it for 20 years. He was someone who redefined whatever he chose to do as what was right, and then was genuinely confused when others disagreed. I was not confused about anything anymore. The social support arrived the way it usually does, not all at once, but in pieces. Dana called every few days. She didn't offer advice. She just asked how I was. and meant it, which is rarer than it sounds. At work, my colleague Renata, a litigation paralegal who had been through her own divorce 8 years prior, noticed I was carrying something. One afternoon, she simply said, "How's the case going?" I had never told her explicitly, but she had figured it out from context, the way perceptive people do. "Slowly," I said, "but forward." "Then it's going correctly," she said, and went back to her files. The second source of support came from an unexpected direction. My older daughter, Megan, who was 21 and a junior at Ohio State. I had not told my children the details. Protecting them from the mechanics of their parents' failure was one of the few instincts Daniel and I still shared. But Megan called on a Tuesday evening, and somewhere in the conversation, something shifted, and she said quietly, "Mom, I know you're doing something. I don't know what it is, but I know you." I told her, carefully, without venom, without the parts that would make her feel she had to choose. I told her about the loan, the bookkeeping, the Vantage payments, the offer I'd refused. She was quiet for a moment. "Don't settle," she said. It was not legal advice. It was not strategic. It was 21 years old and entirely correct. I thanked her and didn't cry until after we hung up, and then only briefly. And they were not bad tears. Daniel's team had gone quiet, observing, I understood, trying to read what I would do next. His lawyer had sent nothing further. Kevin Brandt had not called again. The man in the expensive coat had not returned to my doorstep. They were waiting to see whether the refusal was strategy or stubbornness, whether I would fold under the pressure of time and cost and inconvenience. They were watching. Good, I thought. Let them watch a woman who has already decided. She showed up on a Saturday. I want to be precise about that. She, not he. Because by that point, Daniel had apparently decided that a different kind of pressure was needed. Her name was Michelle. I had suspected her existence for several months before the divorce demand. The late evenings, the new shirts, the particular self-consciousness of a man who has started being looked at differently by someone else. I had never said her name aloud until she was standing on my porch. She was younger than I'd imagined, maybe 35, with the careful presentation of someone who had dressed to make an impression. She smiled when I opened the door. It was not an unkind smile, which somehow made it worse. "Claire," she said, "I was hoping we could talk." I looked at her for a moment. "All right," I said. I did not invite her in. We stood on the porch. She began with the reasonable version of what she wanted to say, that this process was hurting everyone, that Daniel was under enormous stress, that the children, our children, she said, which I noted, would be better served by a clean and civil resolution. She spoke in the measured cadences of someone who had rehearsed this. I let her finish. "I appreciate you coming," I said, "but I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing." Her expression shifted, still controlled, but with something surfacing underneath. She tried another approach. She said that Daniel had been willing to be generous, that I was making this harder than it needed to be, that my lawyer was feeding me unrealistic expectations. She said the phrase moving forward 3 times in 2 minutes. "Michelle," I said, "you're asking me to accept significantly less than I'm legally entitled to in exchange for making this easier for you and Daniel. I understand why that would be convenient for you, but it's not going to happen." The controlled expression slipped. Not completely. She was not a woman who lost composure easily, but the warmth left her face like a window closing. "You're going to regret dragging this out," she said. "Maybe," I said, but I doubt it. She left. She didn't slam the gate. She closed it carefully, which told me more about her than anger would have. She was not impulsive. She was deliberate. And the fact that Daniel had sent her instead of coming himself told me that he understood on some level that facing me directly wasn't working. I went back inside and stood in the kitchen. Hatch came and pressed against my leg, the way dogs do when they sense something happened. I put my hand on his back. I would be dishonest if I said I felt nothing. I did feel something, a cold thread of anxiety, low in my chest. Michelle was not a harmless person. She had chosen this situation deliberately. She understood Daniel's finances well enough to have motivated him toward this settlement structure. She had arrived on my porch not out of goodwill, but as a tactic. And people who use other people as tactics don't stop with one attempt. But here was what I had learned in 44 years and 17 years of legal work. The moment someone escalates to using a third party as a pressure mechanism, it means the primary pressure isn't working. They were running low on options. The man in the expensive coat hadn't worked. The revised offer hadn't worked. Now they had sent someone who was supposed to appeal to my desire for civility, for peace, for an end to the hostility. It was a test of whether I was tired enough to mistake relief for wisdom. I was tired, but I knew the difference. That evening, I called Patricia. Daniel's girlfriend came to my house today, I said. In person. Talked about moving forward and Daniel's stress levels and the children. Patricia made a sound that was not quite a laugh. How'd she do? She didn't get what she came for. Good. Claire, I want you to know. The business evaluator submitted his preliminary findings this afternoon. I was going to call you tomorrow, but since you're calling me. She paused. His estimate of Alderman Construction's fair market value is $1.6 million. He flagged the Vantage Advisory payments independently as anomalous. He's recommending the court treat them as improper distributions. I sat down. Which means, I said, though I knew, which means Daniel's net value calculation is about to change dramatically, which means your share is about to change dramatically. Another pause. He's going to know Monday morning when we file the evaluator's report. I expect he'll react. Let him, I said. I hung up and sat in the quiet house. Hatch was asleep on his bed by the radiator. Through the window, Sycamore Drive was ordinary and still. The neighbors' lights on, someone's car reversing into a driveway, the small, unremarkable business of people's lives, continuing without any knowledge of what was happening inside this pale yellow house. The fear was there. I didn't pretend it wasn't, but it sat beneath something larger now. Something that had been building since the moment I dialed Sandra Chu from a parking garage on a lunch break with a gray plastic tub in my trunk. I had come too far to mistake the fear for a signal to stop. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late March. The Franklin County Courthouse had the particular quality of all bureaucratic buildings. Important things happened there, and the building itself seemed indifferent to all of them. Patricia and I arrived early. I wore a gray suit I had bought for a friend's funeral 3 years prior and had not worn since. Appropriate, I thought, for the occasion. Daniel arrived with his attorney, a man named Garrett Foss, who had a reputation for aggressive posturing and had, in the months since this began, filed 7 procedural motions, all denied. Daniel wore a suit I didn't recognize. He had lost weight. He did not look at me when he entered the courtroom. Michelle was not there. That surprised me. I had half expected her. The hearing was before Judge Angela Wren, who ran her courtroom with an economy of expression that reminded me of Sandra Chu. She had read the filings. That was clear from the way she began, not with introductions, but with a direct question to Foss about the Vantage advisory payments. Foss was prepared for this. He had a prepared explanation. Vantage Advisory provided strategic growth consulting to Alderman Construction across 2022 and 2023, services that were legitimately contracted and accurately categorized. He had documentation. Judge Wren looked at the documentation. Then she looked at Sandra Chu's report, which was part of the record. Then she looked at the court-appointed evaluator's report. Then she asked Foss a question I had not anticipated. Can you provide the scope of work documentation for these consulting engagements? Deliverables, meeting notes, any written product produced by Vantage Advisory Solutions for these payments. Foss said they would be produced in discovery. Mr. Foss, Judge Wren said, this hearing was filed 4 months ago. Discovery has been ongoing. Are you telling me that $340,000 in payments to a consulting firm produced no written deliverables that are currently in evidence? A pause. We're in the process of compiling. The registered principal of Vantage Advisory Solutions, Judge Wren continued, consulting her notes, is listed as Kevin Brandt. Mr. Brandt's professional background, as presented in the evaluator's report, is in secondary education. Is there additional professional background relevant to construction consulting that is not reflected in this record? Foss began a sentence and did not finish it cleanly. He rephrased. Judge Wren waited. Across the aisle, Daniel had gone very still. He was staring at the table in front of him with the rigid concentration of someone trying not to show that they are falling. Patricia spoke then, calmly, clearly, without theater. She walked through Sandra's findings, the evaluator's report, the independent verification of the Vantage discrepancy. She noted that under Ohio statute, improper expense structuring in anticipation of divorce proceedings could be treated by the court as dissipation of marital assets, meaning the $340,000 would be added back to the marital estate for purposes of equitable distribution. She noted that the agreed settlement had been signed without full financial disclosure, which under Ohio law constituted grounds for rescission. She asked the court to void the existing agreement, compel full financial disclosure, and order an equitable distribution hearing based on the business's independently assessed value of $1.6 million. Judge Wren made notes. She asked several questions, precise, procedural, to which Patricia gave precise, procedural answers. She asked Foss 2 more questions, both of which he answered with variations of we would need additional time to compile. Then she looked at both sides and said she would issue her ruling within 10 days, but that the court was inclined to grant the motion to void the existing agreement. That was the sentence. Foss immediately requested a brief recess. Judge Wren granted 5 minutes. In the hallway, I watched Daniel and Foss confer in low, tight voices by the water fountain. Daniel's face had done something I hadn't seen in years. It had lost its arrangement. The careful, neutral confidence he had worn since the night of the pot roast was gone. He looked, for the first time, like someone who had made a calculation error of significant consequence. He glanced at me once. I didn't look away. I didn't say anything. I simply met his eyes with the composure of someone who had spent 4 months in parking garages, reading old tax returns and making phone calls, and preparing for exactly this moment. He looked away first. We returned to the courtroom. The remaining business was procedural. Dates set, filings ordered. It took 20 minutes. When it was over, Patricia touched my arm lightly and said, "Good." Outside on the courthouse steps, the March air was sharp and clear. The city was going about its morning. Somewhere across town, Kevin Brandt was presumably teaching gym class, unaware that his name had just been read aloud in Franklin County Court. "What happens now?" I asked Patricia. "Now," she said, "we wait 10 days, and then we win." Judge Wren issued her ruling in 8 days, not 10. Patricia called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was at my desk reviewing a deposition transcript. She didn't begin with pleasantries. "The agreement is voided," she said. "Full financial disclosure ordered. The court is treating the Vantage advisory payments as dissipation of marital assets. We have a valuation hearing date, May 14th. I set down my pen. "All of it," I said. "All of it," she said. "Claire, this is a very good ruling." The May hearing was, compared to everything that had preceded it, almost anticlimactic. The court-appointed business evaluator testified for 90 minutes about the company's true valuation and the Vantage irregularities. Sandra Chu testified about the discrepancy between declared income and contractual revenues. Patricia presented a detailed accounting of my contributions to the marital estate, the co-signed loan, the bookkeeping years, the salary infusions during the company's lean winters. Documented, itemized, sourced. Foss cross-examined both experts at length. He was skilled, and he tried, I'll grant him that, but he was working without the materials he needed, because the materials didn't exist. There were no deliverables from Vantage Advisory. There were no meeting notes. There was no evidence that Kevin Brandt had ever provided a single hour of genuine consulting service to Alderman Construction. What there was instead was a paper trail of payments from a real company to a shell entity, structured in a way that reduced declared income and, by consequence, reduced my equitable share. The judge found accordingly. Alderman Construction was valued at $1.58 million. My equitable share, accounting for my documented contributions and the court's treatment of the Vantage payments as dissipated assets, was set at $480,000, a lump sum property settlement, payable within 90 days. In addition, I was awarded spousal support of $3,200 per month for 7 years, not 3. The house on Sycamore Drive remained mine, with the outstanding mortgage accounted for in the overall asset calculation. Daniel's lawyer requested a 30-day extension to file for reconsideration. It was denied. There were legal consequences beyond the settlement. The Vantage advisory matter was referred to the Ohio Attorney General's office for review of potential tax fraud and fraudulent financial structuring in the context of divorce proceedings. I didn't ask for that referral. It was the court's own action, a consequence of what the evidence had shown. I don't know what ultimately came of it. That was no longer my case to manage. What I know is this. Daniel sold a 40% stake in Alderman Construction within 4 months of the ruling to cover the settlement payment. He had to. He didn't have $480,000 in liquid assets. The sale, forced and rushed, came at a price below market value. He lost a significant portion of what he had spent 12 years building, not because I had taken it from him, but because he had structured his own deception in a way that made the unraveling inevitable once someone looked closely enough. Kevin Brandt, I later heard through people who knew people in Columbus, was contacted by state investigators. I don't know what was said or what followed. He stopped calling me. That was enough. On the Friday after the May hearing, I sat in Patricia Owen's office for the last time in a professional capacity. She slid the final settlement document across the desk. I read it in full, every line, every clause. The way I should have read the first document, the one I had signed in surrender at a kitchen table while Daniel had practiced his voice. Then I signed it. "You did this," Patricia said, with a directness I appreciated. "We did this," I said. She shook her head, not unkindly. "I filed the motions. You brought me a gray plastic tub from an attic and 12 years of documents you had the foresight to keep and the intelligence to use. That's not me. That's you." I thought about that drive to Dana's lake, the dock in the fading light. "Are you going to finish it?" "Yes." I walked out of Patricia's building into a May afternoon that was warm and ordinary. And mine. I had $480,000 coming. I had the house. I had 7 years of support. I had my daughters, who knew what had happened and had watched it happen and had not needed me to perform suffering for them. And I had something harder to quantify, but no less real. I had looked at a moment when I could have accepted less than I deserved, when fear and exhaustion and the desire for it to simply be over had made that seem reasonable. And I had chosen not to. That was not a small thing. I sat in my car for a moment before starting it. I didn't need to cry. I didn't need to call anyone. I just sat there in the May sun with the windows down and breathed. The first thing I did with the settlement money was not buy anything. I put the bulk of it in a high-yield savings account for 30 days, because after 4 months of legal proceedings, I had developed a reflex for caution that I decided to keep. I sat with the number. I let it be real. And then, slowly, deliberately, I made decisions. I paid off the remaining mortgage on the house on Sycamore Drive, not because I planned to stay there, I wasn't sure yet, but because owning something outright changes how you stand in a room. I felt it the day the payoff confirmation came through, a Tuesday in June. Something loosened in my shoulders that I hadn't known was tight. I enrolled in a graduate program in paralegal studies with a track toward law school. Something I had thought about since my late 30s and quietly set aside, the way women set things aside. I was 44, not 22, and I was under no illusion that the road was short. But it was the road, and it was mine, and that was sufficient. In the fall, I went back to the lake house in Sandusky to visit Dana. And this time I brought wine and didn't talk about Daniel once. We kayaked in the morning and cooked dinner from a recipe Dana had found and made each other laugh until we forgot what we were laughing about. I drove home Sunday evening with the windows down, the way I had started doing things. Windows down, radio on, no particular hurry. Megan graduated the following spring. Her younger sister, Lily, flew in from her study abroad program in Edinburgh, and the 4 of us, Megan, Lily, Dana, and I, had dinner at a restaurant on High Street that I chose because I wanted to, not because anyone else suggested it. I ordered the expensive wine. I didn't calculate whether I could afford it. I knew I could. I started running again, something I had abandoned years ago, long before the divorce, in the accumulation of everyone else's schedule. I ran 3 mornings a week along the Olentangy Trail, early, before the path got crowded, while the light was still coming in sideways through the trees. It was not transformative, it was simply good. I had learned to value things that were simply good. I sold the house on Sycamore Drive 18 months after the ruling. I had thought I would keep it. It was paid off. It was mine. The girls had grown up in it. But I found that I didn't want its particular history anymore. I wanted a new room to read in. I bought a smaller place, a craftsman bungalow in Italian village, walking distance from a coffee shop I liked and a used bookstore I had been meaning to visit for years. Hatch approved of the new backyard. His opinion mattered. As for Daniel, I did not track him. I did not ask about him. What I learned incidentally through the ordinary circuits of a city where you lived for 20 years and cannot quite become a stranger. He and Michelle bought a condo on the east side. I heard this from a mutual acquaintance who mentioned it without particular emphasis. I felt nothing specific, not satisfaction, not grief. Just the neutral registering of a fact. The forced sale of the 40% stake in Alderman Construction had consequences beyond the immediate financial loss. The company's new minority investor, a regional developer named Marcus Holt, had different priorities than Daniel. There were disagreements about contracts, direction, overhead. By the following year, I heard, again, incidentally, through someone at my firm who knew someone in construction, that the company had lost 2 significant municipal bids and was operating under significant strain. Daniel had not built something that could survive being partially sold under duress to a stranger. Perhaps he had known that. Perhaps it was part of why the original deception had mattered so much to him. Kevin Brandt, I eventually learned, paid a civil penalty through the Attorney General's settlement process and filed amended tax returns. He was not charged criminally. I don't know if justice is the right word for what he received. It was consequence, at least. Consequence is more reliable than justice, in my experience. Michelle, as far as I know, is still with Daniel. I don't wish her anything in particular. She made her choices, as we all do, and now she lives with them, as we all do. What I built in the years after the pale yellow house and the pot roast and the practiced voice was not dramatic. That's what I want to say clearly. It was not a second act in the movie sense. It was just my life, returned to me in a form I recognized and had chosen, and it was, in the most ordinary and essential way, enough. 20 years, a gray plastic tub in an attic, one phone call on a lunch break. That's what changed everything. Not revenge, not drama, just a quiet decision, made alone, to not accept less than the truth. Here's what I know now. People who try to take everything are counting on your fear. They build their power in the space between what you know and what you believe you're allowed to claim. Don't give them that space. What would you have done? Signed and walked away or fought back? Tell me in the comments. Share this if it helped someone you know. And thank you, truly, for listening.